another year and another just absolutely kind of pitiful performance from Michigan as it at least relates to the Ohio State game. And right off the top, if you guys have watched one of these before, I'm sure you know, I'm not a Michigan fan or Ohio State fan. I'm a Michigan State fan. So I feel like a lot of the ways that Michigan fans feel about going into Ohio State every year is like when Michigan State makes the Final Four, I know that they're going to lose and it's really never going to be close, that they're just going to get their ass handed to them. But this was a year at least that you thought it could be a little bit different, even if you didn't expect Michigan to win. The one thing that you thought, or at least I thought, is that it absolutely wouldn't be a repeat of last year just because Michigan was on such a roll heading into this game. And they weren't just beating people, right? They were obliterating people. They blew the doors off Michigan State. They blew the doors off Indiana. Who else they play? I think like Maryland in that time frame, even though obviously Maryland isn't any good. They beat Illinois by a whole bunch after kind of getting it close. And then Ohio State had that really close game with Penn State last week, and you thought, the point spread was only like 9. So you thought, maybe there's a chance for Michigan to at least keep it close, if not win outright. And, of course, it just didn't happen. Wendy Atkin, and this is probably going to be the main question coming out of this game, is where do you place the blame? Wendy here starts right off the top. So how long should Harbaugh keep his job? So the thing with Jim Harbaugh, and this is what you saw a lot in really every time Michigan loses, people want Harbaugh's job. It's really not going to happen, and nor should it. Harbaugh's done a good job at Michigan. He's done a good job winning the games. This is a game that he, of course, has to win. But one thing that Jim Harbaugh should get a lot of credit for is, of course, not the performances against Ohio State, but it's when they do have performances like this and people call for Jim Harbaugh to change the offense, change the defense, whatever it is, he's quicker to adapt. So if you take it, again, flip state or in-state on the flip side, right, Michigan State fan, kind of the exact opposite of what Mark D'Antonio is doing now, where D'Antonio refuses to adapt. That's what Harbaugh is really good at, and it's not that he's like catering to the fan base or catering to the audience or anything like that. He's a smart football coach, and he just understands that these results aren't of course what people want, and it's not what he wants. So he's really good at adapting. I think what might happen is Don Brown might end up losing his job. But, obviously everything's still kind of speculation from here. But Harbaugh is safe unless Harbaugh decides to leave himself. He is, of course, not going to get fired. But, you would expect him to make, and seeing how the bowl game goes again, if they get blasted in a bowl game like they did last year coming off the embarrassment that was last year's Ohio State game, then I would expect that you probably move on from Don Brown at that point and get a defense where maybe it's not as effective against teams like Maryland or Illinois, where you don't really need it to be as effective, but maybe it's better at containing whatever Ohio State and Ryan Day and even last year, Urban Meyer is better at containing whatever that offense is, because that's really what you need it for. You don't need it to blow Rutgers out by 50. You need the defense to be able to stay on the field and stay in the games against teams like Wisconsin, Penn State, and Ohio State. Jim Wells, Charles Woodson, next head coach watch. That'd be interesting. He's certainly a guy that can recruit and follow in the footsteps of Juwan Howard over there, which I think that's really interesting too, is Michigan basketball has been on such a run, and they were getting a lot of hype, rightfully so, from Michigan fans about, obviously in the weekend winning the Battle for Atlantis tournament. And now today it seems like none of that really matters, because all the focus is obviously going to be on the Michigan-Ohio State football game, because it went really almost script for script like it did last year, except even this game didn't feel quite as close, at least to me. But last year was close for the first half, and then the second half it got out of hand. This game, not from jump, it wasn't out of hand, but you could tell that there was no way that they were about to stop Ohio State, and they were able just to run all over the place, run wherever they wanted. They ran the ball 50 times, and they only threw it 27. So, they really controlled the game, as opposed to Michigan. And when you're playing from behind, of course, it's going to be flipped. Michigan threw the ball 43 times and then only ended up running it 26. So it was very much the game plan that Ohio State wanted. Taylor says Harbaugh. Well, Taylor says Harbaugh was brought in to do one job and he's never done it. Time to move on. He was brought in to win the Big Ten and win national championships, and obviously all of that runs through Columbus, and he has to do a better job against Ohio State. I don't think there's any question about that, which is why, again, I think they'll probably make a change to the defensive coordinator, or at least have a very kind of long sit down with Don Brown and figure out what they can do to change the defense so that it's more tuned up to beat Ohio State, and that it's not, just Dr. Blitz pressuring all these garbage teams and then not changing anything throughout the year, but maybe changing the defense and having some bumps early in the year. So instead of beating Notre Dame by 50, maybe you only beat Notre Dame by 10, but, at the end of the year, it allows you to keep games against Ohio State closer. Amal says they're a better team than Michigan and Michigan State. That's why is everyone surprised? Just the totality and the brutality of the ass whooping is why everybody's surprised. There's no doubt that Ohio State was a better team than Michigan, but to come out 2 years, and I think the total points scored between the 62 last year and then 56 this year is 118, I think. So, 118 points scored on what we thought was a pretty good Michigan defense for 2 years in a row, and neither game, really competitive. Both of them were last year's a 23-point win, and this year was 29. So that's why everyone's surprised. It's not just a loss; it's how they keep getting smacked around. Wendy says, "I wanted Les Miles for a long time." Les Miles is not a good coach. You see what he's doing at Kansas. Les Miles would be way worse than Harbaugh is doing. Justin C.I. excuses. I mean, I don't know how many excuses you can make for Harbaugh. Some of the stuff, a lot of the undisciplined play, you could probably trace back to some of the coaching. But then there's other things that, of course, aren't the coach's fault directly, like the Shea Patterson fumble on the goal line when it was still a game. But the taking off of J.K. Dobbins' shoes, which is like a 15-yard penalty, that's something that, as a coach, you should be able to run a tighter ship about. And, you saw it in the Ole Miss and Mississippi State game. Sometimes players are just going to get caught up in the moment and do what they do, where you had the guy pretending to piss in the end zone like he was a dog and then got flagged and then they missed the extra point. But lining up offsides on the punt, it looked like they lined up and still jumped off sides somehow. But on the punt, that was 4th and 4, which gave Ohio State the ball to extend their drive, and then they ended up scoring the touchdown. So then there's a couple late hit penalties too. And those are things that you can probably attest to the coach not having his players as disciplined. You didn't really see a lot of that from Ohio State today. And I do have the box score pulled up here. Let me see actually how many penalties Michigan and Ohio State did have. So Michigan only had the 5 penalties, but you can think of 3 off the top of your head that were stupid, which were there's a late hit out of bounds near Ohio State's goal line. So in that one, it probably didn't matter because they're first down and they're probably going to score anyway. It's just a dumb penalty, of course, undisciplined penalty, the offsides on the punt, and then we just had it. The offsides on the punt, and then trying to take off J.K. Dobbins' shoes. And Ohio State actually had more penalties for almost half the yardage. But Ohio State also controlled the game. Possession, 37 minutes to basically 23 or 30. 36 to 24 is probably closer. But you understand that. Michigan did well, but OSU is set for war. Jim is a great coach, and he has done good things here. We are building something great here. I don't see anyone losing their jobs. The one person that you'd probably see losing their job again would be Don Brown. I saw it on Twitter earlier, and I lost it. But they had the length of each Ohio State touchdown drive, and Ohio State had 577 total yards today, and they had about 300 rushing yards, just a little bit under. Let me see if I can see the scoring plays here. Does it tell me how long the drive was? Yeah. So there's a 75-yard touchdown drive, 81 yards, 75 yards, 84 yards, 75 yards, 80 yards. Jesus Christ. 28 yards, which was when Michigan went for it in their own field and didn't get it. And then 47 yards, which again, kind of the same thing. They went for it, but those are both, of course, in the fourth quarter. But before that, the shortest drive that they had was 75 yards, for a touchdown. So that's what you have to tighten up. And if you're going to look at anybody after today, you're probably going to be looking at Don Brown. Blade said he's doing a good job. I'm assuming he means Harbaugh. LOL. If you're content with 9 wins, he can stay, so my Buckeyes can continue to have a bye week before the Big Ten championship. I mean, that's also part of where you want to see Harbaugh run its do better, at least this year, is not losing both of those games to Wisconsin and Penn State. You know, if you only lose one of them, if you only lose one of them, then at least you have the chance at the end of the year to get into the Big Ten title game. And a couple of times in these 5 years that he's been here, he's had a chance to go to Indianapolis on the last weekend. Of course, for the Ohio State game is basically a playing game, and obviously they've lost them all, which is why everyone's so mad. But you want to be in a position that you're actually there, and that's something that Paul Roshan on the Sports Carnage podcast, and we'll talk about this game way more on our podcast that drops on Thursday. We didn't do one this week because of Thanksgiving and everything else. So happy Thanksgiving to everyone. But on our podcast this week, we'll of course talk about this game, and it's something that that Paul's brought up a whole bunch, is because he's a big Harbaugh defender, big Harbaugh guy, is that he just wants a chance to basically go to the Big Ten title game every year at the end. He wants to go into the Ohio State game saying, if we win this game, then we have the chance to go to the Big Ten championship, win the Big Ten, and then obviously go to the playoffs. So for him, that's kind of his marker of success with Harbaugh. I know other fans have higher markers of success where they want to be winning the Big Ten. They don't just want 9 or 10 wins every year. You know, they want 11 wins, 12 wins to get to the playoffs. And if that is your goal and that's something that you realistically see the Michigan program as, then, you know, in your mind, it's probably justifiable to fire Jim Harbaugh. But if you understand that Michigan hasn't been that in a few years, and you think they'll be a team more, I don't know, it's a good comparison. Maybe even like Georgia now, except Georgia's pretty good, or even a team like Notre Dame, where you don't expect them to be in the national title picture every year like Ohio State or Alabama, and you just need that really good mixture of coaching and players, the right seniors, to where maybe once in every 6 or 7 years you can make a legitimate run at a national championship or even at a playoff berth like Michigan had in 2016 when they had the spot controversy against Ohio State, where if they win that game, or if they get that spot and they win that game, then obviously they go to Indianapolis and then they have a chance to play for the Big Ten and for a playoff berth. And honestly and personally is the word I was trying to say. That's more where I see Michigan is not. They're never going to be that every year top title contender. It's more so you get them in a 6 or 7 year pocket where one of those years they're going to be a really good team like they were in 2006, like they were in 2016, where they have a legitimate chance to make the playoffs and to win the Big Ten. But other than that, I just think Ohio State is a step above not only Michigan, but everybody else in the Big Ten as well. Do I think Minnesota could beat OSU if they get to the championship game? I do not. I think Ohio State will wipe the floor with Wisconsin again if they get them, or they'd beat down the boat. They'd poke some holes in it, and there'd be no flex seal here. The boat would just shrink. Not shrink. What's the word? I was drown. No. Capsize? One of those words. Whatever happened to Titanic, that's what would happen. Sink. There it is. Thank you. Thank you from the audience. Jason Miller, I agree. Don needs to tighten it up. If they get blown out of the bowl game, like you said, he could lose his job. Yeah, and he's kind of the perfect scapegoat for it, too. Is you just throw it's kind of like the Lions with Paul Pasqualoni, is you've heard a little bit, if Patricia doesn't lose his job, and Patricia's obviously way more likely to lose his job than Jim Harbaugh is, but they're going to scapegoat the coordinators, right? Last year, they got rid of the offensive coordinator and brought in Josh Gaddis because people are saying the offense needs to evolve and the offense needs to change. And if Don Brown gets blown out again after getting blown out in Ohio State and ends the year on back-to-back, just terrible showings from his defense and not being able to stop anybody, then he'll be the prime candidate to get axed, and then Michigan will try and readjust with the players that they have on defense, implement a new scheme. Sammy says, Ryan, let's be real. OSU was better and faster athletes. That's why they won. Day Aiden, a better coach than Harbaugh. I think, well, we don't know how good of a coach Ryan Day is. To me, it's safe to say that Ryan Day is a good coach. He was calling the offense last year for Ohio State. That was really good, and he's done a hell of a job getting their defense better than it was last year. And you heard them talk about this on I don't know if it was on one of the weekly Fox Sports shows that they have, if it was The Herd or something, or if it was on one of like the post-game shows. But one thing that we noticed with Ohio State this year, as opposed to years past, is under Urban Meyer, there may have been more talent and you might have felt better about the teams overall. But, Urban's teams were good to go ahead and just kind of mess around and lose a game they shouldn't have, or, played a game really, really close that shouldn't have been played close. And it seems like to me that Ryan Day's team, and he has a way smaller sample size than Urban does. So maybe it's not a fair depiction after only not even a full season here. But his teams just seem more focused game in and game out, as opposed to Urban Meyer's teams who they lacked that. In some cases, you saw last year against Maryland, they should have lost to, and then in the Purdue game where they got absolutely bombed on the road to still, it's not a very good Purdue team, and Ryan Day's teams don't have that issue. I think they won every single game by double digits. Their closest was against Penn State, and while Ohio State looked sort of sloppy last week, it was still a game that they ended up winning by 11 points, 2 scores. So it's not like you're really worried at the end. But let's see here. Yeah, they won every game by double digits, and they've blown out most of the teams. Their next closest game besides 28-17 was – no way, it was Michigan State. It was Michigan State. Jesus Christ. It was Michigan State 34-10, and then their first game of the year, they beat FAU 45-21. So besides winning by 11, their next closest win was by 24 points, which, shows you how good and how focused that the team has been. And they will probably always have better players than Michigan. But, at a certain point, coaching can overcome that. You've seen other teams beat Ohio State, and you've seen them beat Ohio State in big spots. So it's not even teams just like Purdue where you can argue Ohio State's looking ahead or Ohio State just isn't coming in prepared because they're not taking their opponent seriously. You've seen teams beat Ohio State in the playoff, and you've seen teams beat Ohio State, like Michigan State did, in the Big Ten championship game, where there'd really be no question that Ohio State was bringing 100% of what they had. And Ohio State has better players than pretty much everybody except, maybe Alabama and Clemson, and really kind of probably just those two teams. But they're kind of, head and shoulders above the rest of the Big Ten. But when you get those great players and you have great coaching like they had with Urban Meyer, and like they'll have, even like they had with Jim Tressel, and it looks like what they'll have with Ryan Day, then they'll be a very, very hard team to beat. The only game that truly matters is Ohio State versus Michigan. If you can't win, you need to go. That's a rough bar. It's certainly fair to say, as a Michigan fan, a Michigan alum, whatever you are, is I just want to beat Ohio State. I don't really care kind of what happens the rest of the year. And then maybe get in a coach that can pull some rabbits out of his head, if you will, to beat Ohio State. And it's a discussion that we've had on Sports Carnage before, and it's a discussion that we've even had just like in our chats, is comparing like Mark D'Antonio and Jim Harbaugh. Is D'Antonio has had college coaching, because obviously Harbaugh was in the NFL. But, D'Antonio has had higher peaks than Jim Harbaugh has had. He's beaten Ohio State. He has gone to the Big Ten championship game. He's won the Big Ten. He's been in the playoffs. He didn't win or even score in the playoffs. But he also has lower lows, right? 6-6 this year, probably depending on what happens against Maryland. I think it's 6-6 or 7-6 last year, a 3-9 season, 6-6 again in 2012. So it's just kind of that comparison, right? Do you want a coach that's able to kind of work some magic some years, and you'll just have a really good, fantastic year where it is one of those 6 or 7, or it is, one of those times in like the 6 or 7 year periods where you feel like it's really your shot to make the playoffs, to make some noise, maybe even win national championship. But then your lows are also way lower than what Michigan is experiencing under Jim Harbaugh. I think the most games that they've lost under him is like 4, which is a really, really solid floor. But if your ceiling is only capped at 10 wins or 11 wins, throughout bowl season, that probably means you're not winning the Big Ten. And if you're not winning the Big Ten, you're, of course, not going to go to the college football playoff unless you are Ohio State of a couple years ago. So it's really kind of which would you rather have? And I think that is an interesting discussion. I know where I stand on it, and being a Michigan State fan, I might be biased, but I would rather have somebody that's able to win you the Big Ten, somebody that can go to a playoff in 1 out of every 3 or 4 years or whatever, and take the 3-9s that come with it, take the 6-6s. And in years like this, where right now you're 5-6 and you're not competitive, you're getting you're getting your doors blown off by teams like Michigan. You're giving up huge leads to teams like Illinois, and you have really more disappointing seasons than what you're experiencing right now as a Michigan fan. So it's really that question: is you want the highest of highs with the lowest of lows, or would you rather operate somewhere in the middle and just try and strike a little bit more luck one year than another and win the Big Ten because Ohio State dropped a game, or because you got a spot in the fourth quarter or in overtime against Ohio State to be able to propel you forward, even if most years you're not you're just not in the position to go to the playoffs or be in Indianapolis. Jim said, I was at that game when the Boilers put it on OSU. I loved it. Oh yeah, with the biggest Purdue fan in our comment section every week, Jim Wells. I'm sure it was a great match for you, but it just kind of goes to what we were saying about Ohio State, at least under Urban Meyer, and you haven't seen it yet under Ryan Day. We'll see in the Big Ten title game, although I expect them to wax whoever they end up playing, and then we'll really see it in the playoffs if they're a team that does go there and just get absolutely manhandled like Michigan State did, which I don't expect because Ohio State looks like they're the best team in the country, or if they go in there and they're able to beat Georgia or Alabama, whoever maybe even Utah, whoever sneaks into to that 4th spot in the playoff, and then play a team like Clemson or LSU in the championship game. But that's another thing that's probably really, really frustrating is for Michigan fans is losing just so much to Ohio State, and then you get your coach, and as soon as you get him, you're really excited. And as much as you defend him, that he's never beaten Ohio State. And then Ohio State, not only do they win a national championship in that time with Urban Meyer, but they go ahead and once Urban Meyer leaves, they got a really good chance to win another title, immediately. As soon as the new guy comes and steps in and takes over for him, you have a chance to do that, which is really it definitely leave a bad taste in your mouth, but maybe it's a good omen for the basketball program, in hopes that Juwan Howard can do the same thing that a guy like Kevin Ollie did, or he came in the first year at UConn and somehow won the national title, beat Michigan State in the tournament to get that national title, and then Kevin Ollie just fell off a map. I think he only coached for like 2 years after that, 2 or 3 years, which is crazy after winning the national title in your first year coaching. But that's kind of what there's a lot of what we have for the game. My biggest questions for you guys was who or what do you place the blame on in this game? Or is there no blame? Is it just Ohio State is straight up better, and no matter what Michigan does, they weren't able to compete? Are you going to blame it on Shea Patterson, who didn't really have a good game? He made some nice throws and he made some bad throws. And then at the end, you saw him get there, and I wouldn't accuse Michigan of quitting in this game, but at the end, you saw Ohio State started to get home a little bit more when they were bringing more pressure. So they're knocking Shea Patterson all around, knocking the receivers. They had the not targeting call now that was on Donovan Peoples-Jones, which looked like it shook him up a bit. And you could tell really towards the end where the game it wasn't in the balance, but there's a certain point where you thought, is this going to go from embarrassing, or is Michigan going to come back and keep it competitive? And then from kind of that point on, it seemed like Ohio State really just started to tee off on defense and go for, just kind of harder hits and bigger plays. And then that got is kind of the final death blows to Michigan to at least keep the game semi interesting. But it was a good game in the first quarter. Michigan obviously came out with a lot of energy, and then in the end, talent just took over. Austin says, what do you expect when Michigan has an undersized defense? I disagree with people in media about firing Harbaugh. He did bring back the program, and yeah, it sucks that he can't beat Ohio State. It certainly does suck, and they do have an undersized defense, compared to what Ohio State had on the offensive line. They said it was on the broadcast. I'm trying to remember the numbers exactly, but Ohio State's their offensive linemen outweighed Michigan's defensive linemen by an average of like 40 pounds per lineman, basically. So that attributed to the success that Ohio State had on the ground all day. I said they ended up running the ball 50 times, and they had something crazy like 67 yards. Let me make sure I got the box score here. 264 yards. And J.K. Dobbins was the biggest beneficiary, getting the ball 31 times, running 211 yards with 4 touchdowns. And then he did some work in the receiving game as well, where at least early it looked like Ohio State really wasn't able to attack downfield. They tried passing the ball, and Michigan defended the pass really well early on. At least downfield, and where you saw some of the bigger Ohio State plays where they were converting on third downs or when they were converting on like second and longs, is there were short routes. It was in play actions, the screens, just kind of quick hitters to Dobbins. I know he had one. He ended up having 50 yards receiving. I don't know who the other gentleman was that had it, but it was a play near Ohio State. They were going in to score. I think it was like third and what was it? It's probably like 3rd and 14 or something. And they just threw a quick pass, and they ended up getting first down. JK 264 yards or 266 yards, 4 touchdowns. Yeah, he's a beast. Ohio State might legitimately have 3 Heisman contenders, even though Chase Young missed a couple games, and he was largely quiet most of this game. But you have Dobbins, you have Fields, and you have Chase Young, who you can make an argument all 3 of them should at least go to New York. None of them would win the Heisman, but it'd still be pretty crazy if you invited like 5 guys to the Heisman ceremony and then 3 of them were all on the same team. I'm not sure that's happened before, and I don't think it'll happen, but I think there's an argument that can be made that each of those guys should at least get an invite, because Ohio State has been so dominant that you can't pin it on one person. All right, we talked about they've won every single game by double digits, and besides the 11-point win against Penn State, their closest margin of victory was 24 points, which they beat Michigan State by, and they beat Florida Atlantic by earlier in the year. But other than that, it's a bunch of 40, 50, 30-point wins. It looks like a 60-point win here against Maryland. So they've been running people, and it's obviously more than just a one-man machine for them. Very well-oiled machine, and I think all of them at least do deserve a lot of recognition. Jason Miller, while the blame goes all over win or lose, we are a team. Defense needed to do more against OSU, and the offense didn't do much in the second half. As for the D-line being small speed versus strength, I like the idea, but that O-line was crazy good. They didn't let a lot get to Justin Fields today. And there were times where you saw, specifically in the first half, sort of like the Michigan State Ohio State game, where Fields didn't look good early, and the offensive line early just looked shaky, where you're able to get to Justin Fields, and then throughout the game, I don't know if it was a different scheming and different blocking assignments or whatever that Ryan Day was able to put out there, but he was definitely able to neutralize the pass rush. And then they just didn't pass as much in general, and J.K. Dobbins was able to run all over the place. And of course, if you're running the ball for 300 yards, then you don't have to worry about the other team getting to the quarterback as much, because you're only dropping back to pass 25 times total. Jerry says it's frustrating. The overall record is 58-51 Michigan, so it's not like we never beat Ohio State. Historically, we are not even competitive anymore. Yeah, I mean, I don't think the all-time record, at least in my opinion, the all-time record doesn't really matter now, but I'm also younger. And in the past 20 years, Michigan's won this game, once or twice, something like that. So when it starts to flip so much during one pretty big portion of the series, I think the all-time record bit, or whatever you want to call it, can kind of be thrown out. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Historically, it's not like Ohio State has always beaten Michigan. It's just in recent history, and since like 2000, Ohio State has owned. I mean, and it's not just Michigan. It's really the rest of the Big Ten in general. But Ohio State won the last 8. That is terrible. Yeah, anytime you beat a team 8 times in a row, it's a lot. Especially when before that, I think they beat them. They beat them before that, like 8 times in a row before the 2012 game, where Brady Hoke was able to best Luke Fickell, who is now at Cincinnati. And that Ohio State team only had like 6 wins or something. But it's a lot. It's a lot of losing to do to one team, which is where, again, I understand where the frustration comes in. And I hope that's not the direction that Michigan State takes with Michigan moving forward, although it looks like for the next couple of years, that's probably what it's going to be. So I'll be right there with you. And then for me, I already made this. I said it earlier when we first jumped on, but of course, all of you probably weren't on at that point. But for me, it's like when Michigan State gets into the Final Four, is you're really excited because you have this big time game, except it almost never works out in your favor. And it's usually not particularly close, except for that game they had against Butler, where they lost by 2. But other than that, you get smacked around by Carolina in the final. You get smacked around by Texas Tech last year, where they couldn't buy a bucket. So I understand where the frustration comes somewhat. Of course, we don't make it to the Final Four every year. I would very much like to. But, kind of being so close to something and just never being able to get over that hump is something that I can at least relate to in that sense. And like I said, it looks like my Spartans are probably going to have some type of similar streak. Hopefully it's not quite as bad against Michigan in the coming years, because there's not a lot of talent, and our coaching situation is very much so in jeopardy and in question. So that's definitely not something I'm looking forward to. And as a Michigan fan, I would be kind of incensed at this point and stir crazy just watching Ohio State every year win, and especially the way the last 2 years have gone, where the game is over by like halfway through the third quarter, and at that point, if you had money on the game, the only thing that you're hoping for is a cover, because the win has gone out the window. Austin says Michigan still leads the historic rivalry. Yeah, we just talked about that a little bit, and he also says Harbaugh does need to recruit better. I mean, Harbaugh is a good recruiter. He's usually not recruiting the type of talent that Ohio State is, but I mean, he's been a good recruiter, and he's been able to even boost Michigan up in that sense from where they were with Rich Rod and where they were with guys like Hoke. But recruiting should and would never be an issue at Michigan. They're just going to need to outcoach Ohio State, because Ohio State's always going to get better players. So if you put just talent versus talent, Michigan will lose that battle 10 times out of 10. And that's where the coaching comes in, the game plans, the scheming. And I mean, and even the crowd, and it's not that the Big House crowd is bad, but there's a heck of a lot of scarlet and gray in that stadium today. So I don't know if they got to have a blockade and stop Ohio State fans from buying tickets or something, but they're almost invading the Big House. If they do fire Harbaugh, I heard the Detroit Lions are looking for a new head coach, and hopefully he would go there. That would be absolutely fantastic for the Lions. And I'd be the biggest shock to me in the last 10 years of Michigan, Detroit coaching decisions if Jim Harbaugh got fired from Michigan. I could see him maybe leaving if he just doesn't want to deal with trying to beat Ohio State anymore and going to the NFL or something on his own accord. But getting fired is something that I could not see happening. I mean, maybe even not ever, but definitely not now. I think Don Brown's way more likely to get fired. John says, "Say hi to my lady friend." Hello, lady friend. Well, there's the hands. I don't know if you saw them, the finger waves, but they were there, wrapped up in it's basically a Snuggie, but it's not anymore. It's called something else. Let's see. Oh, Michigan State's losing to Maryland. That's great. So we might not be 6-6 this year. I might have just lied. We might end up finishing 5-7. with a home loss to Maryland at the end of the year. Should be probably the most embarrassing thing. Besides, no, it'd be more embarrassing than the it'd be way more embarrassing than the Illinois loss. I don't know. Maryland's pretty bad, but they had a lead. We are getting off track now, so I will go ahead and leave you guys to the rest of your Saturday. We do have some more. Obviously fun football on the way. Minnesota. Somebody just gave us an update. It looks like Ohio State will be playing Minnesota. So I want to check on that score. Oh, they're only up 7-0. I thought Minnesota was up 21-0. I do think Wisconsin wins this game, and I do think it's going to be Ohio State and Wisconsin. Again, it won't matter. Because Ohio State should just wipe the floor with whoever comes out of the West, and there's be a sacrificial lamb to send to the Rose Bowl with their tails between their tail between their legs. But anything else happening good? No, Baylor's running amok all over Kansas. Somebody mentioned Les Miles earlier, and that seems like it's not working out well at all. Auburn's leading Bama 7-3, maybe killing their playoff hopes. But that's what we have for you guys around the rest of the country. Make sure you catch us on Sports Carnage podcast. You can download it on Podbean. You can download it on Apple Podcasts. You can go on Google and just type us in and find us wherever you want from there. Right now, before we end this video, go ahead and you see the link in the description is lit up blue that says Sports Carnage Podcast. Go ahead and hit that, and then go and like our page, comment, give us a review. Just follow the links that we have on there. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on YouTube. Obviously, that's our Facebook link. But go ahead there, review all of our content. And if you guys like what you hear, then let us know and share and do all of that fun stuff so that one day we can be the #1 podcast in the world. But that's what we have for you guys today. I'm Ryan from the Sports Carnage podcast. Again, make sure you check us out. Thank you for tuning in, and go green, go white.